pass it up.
Thanks. Thank you very much. This is great Q&A. I'd like to hear, and this isn't really about the film it's about, but it does pull something out of the legacy issue. I'd like to really hear views on the Marin decisions in the last couple of years and how that's going to shape, and how many of us feel has really taken a unfortunate direction on the legacy of the court of ICTY.
So this is the Perisic and Gotovina acquittals. I think, there were always, one of the speakers in the film said, there are always individual decisions we're going to disagree with. I think those were two low points of the tribunal. So the Gotovina acquittal was about a collateral damage rule for shelling, and I feel the appellate chamber found it was insufficiently established. So rather than taking new evidence or figuring out what the rule should be, just said acquittal. And I just didn't think that followed. I just thought it was illogical. And one wonders what happened here. So Perisic, similarly, we've gone about 20 years, and there were, two prongs to aiding and abetting, a substantial participation and a mental state requirement. So 20 years into the court's work, they had a third prong. Oh, you have to have directed. What is it directly? Specific direction. So you have to have specifically directed the arms to the courts, as if, you put a post-it on these tanks, they're for genocide only. Well, when are you going to specifically direct things? It's set way too high a standard.
And this has to happen. This is what trials do. So I would say that again sort of just underscores the fact that these are not, they're not truth commissions. They're not victim-centered. They're about perpetrators, and they're about the law. And they're great for international lawyers. We can argue these points. We can talk about international law, points of law. We can develop the law through these cases. But they don't do that. They don't play that well on the ground in a country that's dealing with the aftermath of a war.
From where I work, we were deeply disturbed by both of those outcomes for the reasons that have been laid out. And I think it highlights for us, as well as for other tribunal and court supporters, the kind of approach we need to take towards these institutions, in that we support them, we welcome them, but at the same time, when we see mistakes being made, we think it's important to call those mistakes out in a principled and constructive way. So after the Perisic decision, we published an op-ed in the then International Herald Tribune criticizing the standard that the appeals chamber at the ICTY set. And I think constructive criticism and calling into question what is going on and where some of the problems are is a responsibility of those who want these tribunals to be as effective as possible. It's not contradictory to support for these judicial institutions.
Okay, fine. Good.
Yeah, actually, my comment would not be about the film. The film is amazing. I'm really deeply moved by it, and think you explored tough questions well. So it's daring too, from where we sit. People who've been trying this for a long time. My question is more to you, and the insistence that trials are not victim-centered, are not transitional justice mechanisms, or you said they are, but you said they are not, but they're only legal. I really beg to differ with you. And we are working very hard on making the ICC at least more reparative than has been traditionally. It's true that the ICTY was not victim-centered. It's true that Nuremberg was not victim-centered, but that's a very great mistake in international justice and in justice in general. The truth and the law should be of meaning to victims and to the societies. It shouldn't be just an isolated law institution that covers only guilt and innocence. That's a mistake. That shouldn't be the reality that we agree with or accept for the way it is. Sorry.
I would just say I'd be curious. I mean, we can talk about this another time, but I'm interested in how that would be done because a tribunal. No. All I wanted to. All right, sorry. Leave it alone. I'll leave it alone. Sorry.
Exactly, because if you're right, then the system has to always propose justice, transitional justice mechanisms, reconciliation mechanisms, etc.
Yeah.
So you're creating huge complex.
I just want to perhaps reflect on the question, which I agree with. And so the Yugoslav tribunals are first attempt at justice after Nuremberg. So the ICC is an evolution. So at the ICC, victims have standing and they can get reparations. Ironically, they actually had standing at the Iraqi High Tribunal, one that didn't work so well, but they have standing there. So some of our tribunals, and this is kind of our later wave, that victims should have their own standing, not just who the prosecutor happens to call, which is, then you may have meritorious victims, they want to be heard, and no, we don't need you. We already have a witness to testify. So the ICTY is our attempt, and it wasn't very victim-centered, and now we're trying to remedy that with the ICC and in the reparations phase. You're absolutely right. So it's our new generation of tribunals recognizing how do you make these courts that really do focus a lot on the perpetrator guilt also work for victims and also honor the victims. So it's absolutely a challenge. And we're working on it now in a way that we weren't when the ICTY was created.
Just to add, I think for the International Criminal Court, that is one of its most central challenges for an institution like the ICTY, based in The Hague, thousands and thousands of miles away from the communities most affected by the crimes. How do you make the rule of law that is reflected in these trials? How do you make the bridge of victims participating not simply as witnesses, but as individuals or parties with experiences to bring to bear in the proceedings? How do you make that bridge come alive so as to lessen the distance between the court and the community? I think that is an enormous challenge, as Jennifer said, and it's something the NGO community involved with the court is struggling with court officials to bring about, and the results aren't in yet. It's something to follow.
Just to add one final thought. One of our other steps on the way was the development of hybrid tribunals. And one of the things we've done with these hybrids, such as Sierra Leone Special Court, Cambodia, extraordinary chambers of the courts in Cambodia, is put them in the situation country. Because it is recognized if your justice is off in The Hague, it's very hard to reach. But if you have it in Freetown or Phnom Penh, it's a little, but you still have to do outreach. You still have to bring in journalists, school children. You have to work with them, explain justice. So it's an ongoing process. This field of international justice is about 20 years old. I really feel like it started in 1993 after it was, in the deep freezer after Nuremberg. So we haven't been at it that long, and you're absolutely right. How do you make justice meaningful for the victims, and how do you incorporate them? Absolutely. David.
Yes. I just wanted to come back to the movie. I found very, very good your conclusion when you gave the floor to people who said, we were not at war and we are not to be at war. We are the same people, the Serbs, That's my experience. I was a volunteer in the European Law Students Association. I was in Sarajevo, I was in Belgrade, I was in Zagreb. That was 1990. Then suddenly a friend of mine told me, just now you take the boat because something is happening in Knin, there will be a war. I said, a war here? Yeah, you see these flags, like the Ustasha flags, they are coming. That was a Croatian friend of mine, not a Serbian. Some people here, they want to mastermind the war. And they managed. It was a war masterminded by few. And the legacy is not yet finished because the legacy of the tribunal will not be adjudicated, thanks God, by those two acquittals, which are a shame. And thanks God you interviewed Judge Adjus, who wrote one of the best, together with Judge Pokar, dissenting opinion on the Gotovina, which is a shameful judgment that didn't send the person to retrial because the person had the right to be retried, not to send acquitted in the absence of available evidence. You retry at the chamber level. In any case, we have to see whether Karadzic and Mladic, which are among those masterminders, will be convicted or not, if the truth will be established, and so on and so forth. So the job is not finished, but I think the main job of the tribunal is really to identify individualized guilt. The war is not committed by the Serbs. The war starts because somebody decided that there should be a war. As what we are seeing now in Syria, Iraq, and so on, has been decided by very, very few people. Now you have hundreds or thousands going, but if those very few would have not decided, it would have not happened, and we would not have today the destruction of cultural heritage and thousands of people being enslaved and killed every day in Syria and Iraq and in other places in the world. So I think the work that you have shown is very telling. And at the end of the day, Yugoslavia will be soon back again united. Because once all the states in former Yugoslavia will be part of the European Union, there will be no borders. In the EU, we don't have borders. I'm Italian, I walk into France and I can walk back without a passport, without anything. There is no visa. And Croatia and Slovenia are already in, and the others are set to come in as soon as they will be ready. It will take a while, but they will be in for sure, 100%. It's already decided politically. So shows the total inutility and flown idea of dividing a country through war. So I think your conclusion is the part of the movie that as a lawyer I liked most. As far as the idea that the law should be, if I can say something and I finish, the fact that we charge the court with the idea of truth-telling or bringing reconciliation, that was wrong from the start. It was because in 1993 the council didn't know what to do and they just created a court. They should have intervened militarily to stop Milosevic, Trujiman, and so on and so forth. They didn't do it, so they created a court. But nevertheless, because we try an individual offender in Manhattan if he kills or she kills one man or one woman, that automatically means that we shouldn't question why we shouldn't prosecute a person who tried to kill 100,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. The question shouldn't even be posed. There has to be a tribunal for this type of crime. And the goal of this tribunal is to bring justice to the victims, of course, with the achievements we achieved with the Rome Statute, so the victims participate. But that's in and of itself enough. Without that, there cannot be any idea of transition and other things. Otherwise, our civilization will collapse. So there is no alternative to this, and I think notwithstanding all the difficulties and the challenges, you really made a movie that made the case for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just curious, Ramsey Clark in particular, gave him one soundbite. And there was a strong, on the one hand, on the other hand, quality to that soundbite. I was curious what was left on the editing room floor.
There's probably about a good 45 minutes of Ramsey Clark going off into every war that ever occurred. So we had to kind of break it down to like more of a focus. He's a very astute man. He had a lot of great insight, but his memory was more toward the ICTY and Iraq. He had a lot of experience in Iraq. So it was actually a tough interview because his memory of the ICTY was kind of fading. It had been a number of years for him. But it was a very good interview.
I have a question. We have a question over there. Oh, sorry. You'll be like the third remarks. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just going back to the Gotovina Perisic fiasco, I guess, and the acquittals of that. Judge Harhoff, as he went out, he wrote a pretty angry letter where he pointed out the bias of certain judges based on things that really don't have anything to do with the Yugoslavian issues, I guess. What do you think, or do you have any impressions about what that did as far as people's trust in the ICTY and the judges? And do you think there's any merit in what he pointed out as kind of moving away from the commander's responsibility and as part of the joint criminal enterprises? And do you what do you think? Where are we going as far as the ICC goes and the joint criminal enterprise itself? And how do we prosecute that?
Well, I can answer the easy part of that question, and I'll leave it to the academic colleagues at the table to answer the tougher part. I know Judge Harhoff. I've known him for many, many years, and I respect him enormously. You know, I think he really is a force for good. I was pleased to see him on the ICTY bench. I have to say, whatever the criticisms were, I think it was an imprudent move on his part to send those out by email the way he did. One knows what one sends by email can wind up anywhere, and I respect his views and opinions, but I don't know if at that particular moment of time it was the right thing to do to share those publicly, and I interpreted his decision to do it by email as a kind of effort to circumvent better practice, which would have been, I think, to sit on those for a while and reflect on them and then express them in a different form. That would have been my recommendation. I think it did a tremendous amount of damage to the ICTY, but that's not the reason I begrudge his decision in terms of dissemination at that point. I mean, let the truth come out, but I think it needs to come out in a more thoughtful and judicial kind of way.
I have another, I just wanted to share an observation when you're talking about the effect on the human rights defenders in Serbia and Croatia. I worked in Bosnia immediately after the war, and I was there for 4 years, and my greatest lament about the court from at least 96 to 2000 was the fact that the UN hadn't funded public information efforts, and I actually was spokesperson of the OSCE mission, and I was really, really upset by it because those years were really important, and and the court lost all those years in building a relationship with the public, an expectation that they would be informed in a timely manner, and you could do that on websites, etc. But most people didn't have access to websites, so it speaks volumes to the fact that the Cambodian courts and the Sierra Leone courts are there, located where these crimes and where these egregious crimes and atrocities took place. And I see that as one of the greatest failures of ICTY from my own personal viewpoint as somebody who was there. And now I teach human rights, and I teach human rights at Columbia, and I talk about this as a void that really, I think, undermined the credibility of the court in our region.
Yes. No, I absolutely agree. They created it without any outreach capacity. Again, I think it's growing pains. They hadn't done this. Now we get it. There's got to be outreach. Justice must be done and seen to be done. So they need like a PR function, because They write these judgments, and they're like 400, 800 pages long, and they're on the internet. Well, almost no one from the situation countries are going to sit and read all of them. And even the summaries are just very, very legalistic. So all these tribunals need outreach. It's a learning process. I think it's one Sierra Leone very much internalized. When David Crane started, he got it. He met with us in the early days when he first had his job, and we said, one of the real failings of ICTY was a lack of outreach. You've got to explain. And he went on road shows. He had town hall meetings throughout Sierra Leone. I've seen his billboards. He explained what a trial is. In local languages. I mean, he went very, very step by step and did these town hall meetings. And as a result, I think, it had impact. And you see, accountability now clubs in high schools in Sierra Leone. It had some impact. So it's all a learning exercise. Yeah, they didn't think to create it. I think it was the first Gabrielle Kirk MacDonald, an American judge, decided, gosh, we got to have our views known in the region. So she had this epiphany. And I think she had to get funding from NGOs I think it was really U.S. NGOs that funded and said, yeah, you need, and it never became part of the ordinary budget. They never internalized. I asked one of the judges, who will remain unnamed, what is your role in outreach? And he said, I don't do that. I have others who do that. I'm like, no, that's the wrong answer. Everyone at a tribunal has to take this on. This is part of your task, part of your mission. So it's growing pains and absolutely wasted time.
Well, I have a question.
Oh, God.
Actually, I have a comment.
This is my husband, by the way, so be warned.
To the gentleman that picked up on Ramsey Clark, I think that was your first interview of a major figure. So she was jumping for joy. Okay, she was about to interview Ramsey Clark, and then when she came back home, she was terribly disappointed. Yet at the same time, happy and thrilled. I think he even asked her whether he should put on a tie or anything. She was charmed by it. So it was really nice. But I do have a question. Help me out. What was as I learned from my wife, the United States is not part of this international criminal. So what was Madeleine Albright talking about in the United Nations over there with the truth and finding the truth to be the victor, etc.?
Well, I mean, it gets back to the first question. As you realize, the shot of Madeleine Albright was around the Security Council discussion to establish the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which was the focus of Erin and June's film, obviously. It dealt exclusively with crimes committed in the Yugoslav region in a set period of time. The International Criminal Court, which was not created by the Security Council, but rather through a protracted negotiation involving 150 different governments, has a potentially worldwide universal authority to prosecute genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, and soon the crime of aggression in some situations. That is a court that the United States has very different attitudes towards, because it could affect U.S. citizens, military or civilian. And they have had a truly ambivalent relationship that's changed over the last 15 years. Not totally. And I think this gets to something that those of us in this country need to deal with, and that is a certain American exceptionalist feeling that these courts may be good for other parts of the world, but for America they're really not necessary, because we can take care of whatever crimes are committed. The accountability for U.S. crimes in Afghanistan, in Iraq, at Guantanamo, provides a very telling response to how untrue that notion of U.S. exceptionalism is when it comes to justice. So the U.S., as Jennifer said, is on the outside, and in some situations quite hostile to the work of the ICC, as will unfold in regard to the preliminary examination underway on crimes committed in Gaza last year. So it's a very situation-specific approach to the court that really undercuts, as I said, U.S. claims to champion justice for these crimes.